She smiled when he said the weekend would be just for them. Suitcases packed, dresses chosen, new perfume. He promised the sea, the wind on her face, the silence broken only by the waves, and a whispered, "I love you," in her ear. But when she got to the door with her small suitcase, she found only emptiness. He didn't answer. He didn't show up. And while she sat on the steps of the building trying to understand what she had done wrong, on the other side of the city, the speedboat glided over the water with another woman in her place. He took the large suitcase, the expensive wine, the luxurious body, and left behind the only love that couldn't be put into numbers. But what he didn't know is that some hearts, when they leave, come back sharp. She didn't scream, she didn't beg, she didn't post indirect messages. She remained silent, but her silence was a minefield. As he laughed on the deck with raised glasses and kisses in the sun, she began to see everything with different eyes. Love becomes a wound when it is scorned, and her wound didn't bleed, it matured. The same man who laughed when he traded her like someone who trades a designer watch would soon discover that time takes interest on what was thrown away with disdain, and there is no money in the world that can buy what he lost when he chose status over feelings, because the true luxury is having someone to stay when it's all over. And he threw that into the sea. If this story has already caught your attention, in the first few seconds, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It makes all the difference in helping more people find stories like this. She spent the night folding the same clothes 3 times. She chose the blue dress because he once said it matched the Malibu sky. She set aside the soft perfume, the one with floral notes, because he used to tilt his face and whisper that that smell reminded him of spring. In the small suitcase, she packed more hope than clothes. It was Friday, and he had promised her a weekend by the sea, just the two of them. No commitments, no meetings, no ringing cell phones. He said, "Let's disappear, just the two of us. You deserve the world." And she believed him. She believed him like someone who had never been taken anywhere, like someone who had always been on the outside of parties, photos, and dinners with men in suits and women who knew how to smile with their eyes. It was a dream, or at least she wanted it to be. On Saturday morning, the sun seemed to conspire with her plans. She walked down from the building with a light heart, her steps floating and her suitcase on wheels making that sound of hope on the cement. She sent a simple message, "I'm coming down." She waited 5 minutes, 10, 15. The blue notification never appeared. She thought about calling, but remembered that he hated being charged. "Trust me, love, I'm on my way." So she trusted a little more. She sat on the steps of the entrance, adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder and watched the cars pass by. Each one that slowed down made her heart rise, and each one that passed by made her heart shrink. The doorman offered her a coffee. She declined with a discreet smile and a polite lie. "He's coming soon." The clock passed 9, then 10. At noon, the shadow of the tree no longer covered her feet. The wheels of the suitcase were covered in dust. Her cell phone was silent, and her heart was beginning to understand. The pain didn't come like a punch. It was like a cold current running up her legs. She understood without needing to see it, without anyone telling her. There would be no sea, there would be no weekend, there would be no us two. He was gone, but not with her. At the bottom of her bag, she found an old hair tie, the same one she had been wearing the first day he noticed her. She looked at it and tied her hair in a high bun, as if to say to herself, "Get up." She dragged her suitcase back in silence. The doorman didn't ask her anything, and she didn't explain anything either. She went up the stairs without looking back, because deep down she knew there are doors that don't close with a key, but with absence. And that day, he didn't lock anything. He just threw everything wide open. She spent the whole Sunday at home. The closed blinds let in only a grey light, as if the sky was also ashamed. The suitcase was still leaning against the foot of the bed with the zipper open, like an uncomfortable reminder of what hadn't happened. Every item inside seemed to laugh at her. The blue dress, the perfume, the strappy sandals she barely wore because she was insecure about her feet. All of that was now an altar of ridicule. Why did she believe him? Why did she think it would be different this time? The answer lay in every silence he had planted in the last few months, and which she insisted on watering with excuses. He's tired. Work demands too much. He loves me. He just doesn't know how to show it. She only left her room on Monday morning, not to work. She had asked for the day off in advance because she thought she would be back from the beach with warm skin and stories to tell, but she only came back with a parched soul. She made coffee like someone following a survival protocol. She drank it without sugar. She didn't even notice. The phone was still silent. Nothing. No justification. No apology. No, "I'm sorry, I was wrong." Nothing. And that was what hurt. The most. The absence not of his presence, but of the slightest respect. He didn't even bother to say he wouldn't come, because deep down, maybe he thought she didn't deserve an explanation. Or worse, maybe he knew she would wait anyway. On Tuesday, he posted a photo, at sea, with another woman. Smiles, glasses, legs crossed on white cushions. She wore sunglasses and her hair loose in the wind. The caption read, "Moments worth gold." And the location was the same coast he had promised. The same place she had dreamed of, the same blue sky that matched the dress that was still thrown on the bed. She looked at the photo for long seconds. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just breathed, deeply, like someone who dives to survive the pain and not to be saved. Because she knew no one would come to save her this time. She would have to get out alone. At work, her colleagues asked her how her weekend was. She smiled softly and said, "It's okay. I stayed home." None of them knew about the trip. She guarded that relationship like someone protecting a small flame from the wind. He didn't want exposure. He said it was better this way, that the world was cruel and envious. She thought it was care. Today, she knew it was shame. He hid her because he never thought about staying, because he never intended to take her beyond the promise. And yet, she loved him. In a sad way, like we love something that hurts us, but that we still believe can change. She spent the night staring at the ceiling, trying to find some trace of anger within herself. But all she had was immense disappointment with herself, not with him, because he, she now saw, had always been the same. She was the one who had deluded herself. She was the one who fantasized, who dreamed, who insisted on painting with color what had always been shadow. And it was at that moment, in that silent room, with the blue dress still hanging on the chair, that something inside her began to change. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't pride. It was something else. It was the beginning of the end of love, and the beginning, albeit imperceptible, of a new look at herself. He woke up early that Saturday. The sun was streaming through the cracks in the roof, reflecting off the white marble floor. His large suitcase had been packed the night before, not with summer clothes. He had someone to take care of that. It was full of symbols, watches, cigars, bottles of wine he couldn't even pronounce properly. This was the kind of luggage he took on weekends when he wanted to impress. Nothing in it was light. Not the contents, not the intention. The woman sleeping in his bed was beautiful, but not in a way that was touching. She was beautiful as if she were part of the decor, an expensive painting on the wall. She moved around with boredom as if everything was an obligation. And yet, she was the one he decided to go with. She had followers, presence, a name among the right ones. She was the kind of woman who didn't ask where they were going, just what kind of makeup he should wear. That made everything easier. He didn't have to fake emotions, just maintain a pose. And he was good at it. He was trained for it. As the boat cut through the sea, he looked at the horizon as if trying to escape from himself. The breeze messed up his slicked-back hair, but he didn't care. He smiled for the photos. He toasted with glasses he couldn't even taste. He had everything the world said was right to have: luxury, beauty, exclusivity. And yet there was a silence that no background music could fill, a space where she, the other one, still lived. Yes, he thought about her. When he lay down on the lounge chair, when he took his first sip of the expensive wine, when the other woman laughed at something trivial and he wanted to turn his face away, he thought about her small suitcase, the way she got nervous before traveling, the way she folded her dresses as if they were fragile jewelry. He thought about her, and the look on her face when she understood everything. But he didn't come back. He didn't write, he didn't call, he didn't apologize. He had always been good at cutting out what no longer fit, or at least he thought he was. Maybe it was fear. Fear of facing what was real. She saw him in a way no one else did. She didn't admire his bank balance or his designer clothes. She knew his fears, his weaknesses, his past stories he pretended to forget. And that scared him, because true love meant being seen. And he didn't want to be seen. He wanted to be applauded. Late that afternoon, when he posted the photo with his new companion, he hesitated for a second. His finger hovered over the screen before confirming. But he clicked. He published. As if that gesture sealed something. As if he were telling the world and himself that he was fine, that this was what he wanted, that this was what he deserved. But the taste of the lie was bitter, and her silence, on the other side of the city, weighed more, heavily than any judgment. He believed that everything would pass, that women like her suffered in silence and then accepted it, that he could still come back if he wanted to, that she would wait for him, as she always did. But at that moment, he didn't know that he was already losing it, not just her, but everything that truly made him human, and that not all the money in the world could buy back. She met him on a night she almost didn't go. She was exhausted and had promised herself she wouldn't go out with friends who just wanted to escape their loneliness by listening to loud music and drinking full glasses. But she did. And there he was, standing, surrounded by people who laughed out of convenience, who praised him out of fear or interest. He had that kind of presence that was both attractive and intimidating, an air of someone who owned the world, of someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. And it was precisely because she didn't care about him that she caught his attention. She didn't flatter him. She didn't ask for a photo. She didn't even smile at silly jokes. When he asked her name, she answered effortlessly. When he tried to impress her, she just laughed. It was that laugh that disarmed him, because it came from a clean place where no one wanted anything from him, just presence, and he didn't know how to deal with that. He was used to being currency, status, not being seen as a man. For the first time, someone saw beyond the suit. At first, he was kind. He sent her flowers without a note, called her just to hear her voice. He said he needed to breathe a little of the peace she carried, and she believed him, because deep down, she also needed to be chosen. And she was. For a few weeks, she was. They walked hand in hand away from the flashes, laughed about silly things in hidden coffee shops. She felt like she was building something, and even when he disappeared for 2 days, he said it was the rhythm of his life, that she needed to understand. And she understood. He always found a way to understand. Over time, he changed. Little things. The long silences between one message and the next. The invitations that were always last minute. His refusal to go to simple places with her. Let's go where no one can see us, just the two of us. It sounded romantic, but it was a hiding. He didn't want to be seen with her. Not because she wasn't enough, but because she was too much. Because she exposed his truth. And that hurt more than any scandal. She loved lightly, but he was made of armor. Everything about him was calculation. What to wear, where to appear, what to say. She was made of urgency, of truth, of lingering hugs, of hands that sought warmth and not window dressing. And because of that, he began to pull away. Not for lack of feeling, but for fear of it. True love demands surrender. And he was good at buying, but he never learned to give. She didn't realize it at the time. She thought he was just overwhelmed, that his world was just like that. She defended him to her friends who doubted him, to her family who thought he was strange. She said he was different, and he was, but not in the way she thought. Today, looking back, she understood the signs. Every last-minute cancellation, every vague promise, every excuse disguised as charm. It wasn't inattention. It was choice. He didn't want commitment. He wanted control. And deep down, she gave in, thinking she could cure him with patience, as if love were medicine. But now she knew love is a bridge, and if only one crosses, the other is left alone on the other side. She didn't talk to anyone about what happened. She didn't write a long text. She didn't seek comfort from her friends. She also didn't confide in her mother, who had always been suspicious of him, or her co-worker who said that men like him only liked to show off. She didn't want to hear, "I told you so." She didn't want to hear anything, really. What she needed now was to shut up. Because silence is the first language of someone who has been betrayed in their soul, and in her case, it was the only safe place after talking to herself so much in a relationship where only she believed. For the next few days, she carried on as if nothing had happened. She arrived at work on time, completed her tasks with a discreet smile, and answered okay to every automated question she received in the elevator. It was almost an exercise in invisibility. But inside, everything hurt. She would see couples walking hand in hand on the street and swallow hard. She would see notifications on her phone and hope in vain that one would be from him. Sometimes I would dream about the weekend that never happened, and I would wake up with my chest tight, as if I had forgotten to breathe. One afternoon, sitting alone at the bus stop, she saw a lady reading a book with a worn cover. The title said, "Love doesn't make us weak. It shows us where we are weak." That pierced her like a knife. Because for the first time she didn't feel foolish for having loved. She felt human, fragile, yes, but awake. And perhaps that was when the subtle movement of starting over began. Not the kind that involves drastic changes, haircuts, or trips to forget. It was an intimate, almost imperceptible new beginning. A silent reconfiguration. As if, inside her, someone was saying softly, "You're going to get up. Just don't run yet." She arrived home that night, opened the bag she hadn't yet unpacked, and began to put each item away without rushing. She folded the blue dress as if she were finishing a story. She put the perfume away in the back of the drawer. He picked up the sandal, looked at it for a few seconds, and then put it back in the box. Instead of putting it back on the shelf, he left it on the bed. As if to say, "It's not time yet, but it will come." The pain was still there. It wasn't anger or hate. It was something deeper. It was mourning for everything she believed. Fear that didn't exist, for every word spoken in vain, for every hope that turned into disappointment, for every gesture of hers that he never saw. And this mourning didn't ask for comfort. It asked for respect, including her own respect. And that night, for the first time in weeks, she looked at herself in the mirror with different eyes, no longer looking for what was wrong with herself, but trying to find again what had been forgotten, her dignity. She didn't know how she would go on from there. She only knew that she no longer wanted to diminish herself to fit into the space of someone who had discarded her as if she were superfluous. What she had to offer was rare, and rare things are not begged for. They are acknowledged. And if he didn't see them, maybe the problem wasn't her. Maybe he only saw brightness where there was a reflection, and not his own light, and she always shone from the inside out. The days began to pass without her telling him anything anymore. She stopped. Looking at his last view, wondering why he hadn't said anything yet. The penny had completely dropped. He wasn't going to apologize. He wasn't going to knock on the door saying he regretted it. Because those who act like that, like he did, don't feel. He chose, with conviction. And that, as much as it hurt, was freeing. She started waking up a little earlier. She drank coffee calmly, as if that moment were a sacred ritual of presence. She turned on the music low and let the water in the kettle sing as if to let her know you are alive. She went back to writing in her notebook, something she hadn't touched in years. Loose words on the paper, nothing too elaborate, but enough to see inside herself. It was as if she was making contact with a forgotten part of herself, a part that didn't need to be loved to exist. A co-worker complimented her new haircut. She smiled and thanked her, but didn't explain that she had cut it alone in the bathroom on a sleepless night. That each strand that fell into the sink seemed to carry away an invisible weight. The changes weren't aesthetic, they were symbolic. She started taking better care of herself, not to show off, but to feel whole. She went back to the local gym and stopped putting off the photography course she had always dreamed of taking. And the most curious thing, all of this without announcing anything. She didn't post, didn't let anyone know, didn't care about being seen. She was too busy being seen. At home, she rearranged the furniture. She moved the sofa, bought a new plant, changed the curtains. It was as if each external gesture cleaned a corner inside. She gradually felt lighter, less anxious, less stuck in the past. And even when she remembered him, and she did remember, of course, it no longer hurt like before. It was a dull memory, almost like an old photograph faded by time. Love didn't turn into hate, it turned into learning, and that was much more valuable. One Wednesday morning, walking down the street with a coffee in her hand, she stopped in front of a shop window and saw herself reflected. She was different, not just on the outside, but mainly in her eyes. There was no longer that sparkle of someone waiting. Now there was focus, ground, presence. She was coming back to herself. And the most beautiful thing was that no one noticed, because true new beginnings don't make noise, they blossom from within. An old acquaintance invited her to an event. In the past, she would have refused. Now she accepted. She arrived alone, wearing a simple dress and a serene expression. She didn't look for familiar faces. She just walked lightly. She didn't need to be seen by anyone to feel valuable. And for the first time in a long time, she felt something new. Peace. It wasn't about replacement. It wasn't about erasing what she had lived. It was about accepting. She loved. She gave herself. She was true. And she was left. But that didn't diminish who she was. On the contrary, it showed that she was capable of feeling something that many would never feel. Pure love, without interest, without calculation, without status. And if he didn't know how to recognize it, then he was the one who lost. He came back from the weekend thinking he had won. The photos with his new wife garnered likes, envious comments, and invitations to exclusive events. She was the kind of companion who was good for his image, molded, trained, edited. He liked the feeling of control. But it only took a few weeks for the cracks to start appearing. His new partner was everything he said he wanted, until he started exposing exactly that. He posted too much. He showed too much. He wanted more. And, worse, he demanded presence, real presence, not just appearance. In business, important meetings began to not flow as they used to. A long-time client asked to terminate a contract without explanation. Another claimed dissatisfaction with unfulfilled promises. The company continued, of course. No one falls from an empire overnight. But anyone who knows the ground well knows when it starts to shake. And he began to feel it. Small rejections, doors that took longer to open. People who had previously greeted him enthusiastically now looked away. Not out of anger, but out of coldness. And coldness is the worst kind of forgetfulness. In his personal life, the decline was more subtle. Relatives who had previously been flattering began to treat him with a certain distance. His new wife began to complain about the lack of attention. He tried to compensate with gifts, trips, dinners, but it was like trying to fill a leaky well with buckets of gold. Everything flowed away, nothing remained. And the worst part? He no longer felt pleasure, even in victories. One night, alone on the roof, he opened an expensive bottle and watched the city from the balcony. The view was the same, but for the first time, he didn't know what he was looking at. He felt an emptiness that luxury couldn't fill. He picked up his cell phone. He looked up her name, the woman with the small suitcase, the one who never asked for anything but the truth. He looked at their last conversation, months ago. No answer, no demands, just the echo of everything that was left unsaid. And that, curiously, was what hurt the most. She didn't scream, she didn't beg, she didn't expose, she just disappeared. The next morning, the assistant brought an envelope with the news that one of the company's main accounts had been transferred to another firm. He swallowed hard. He called to try to reverse the decision, but all he heard on the other end was, "Decided." He sat down, still holding the phone in his hand, and remained motionless for several minutes. It was just a contract, but he knew. This was the beginning of a comeback that he didn't know how to stop, or where it would take him. She didn't know exactly when, but something inside her stopped hurting. It was as if, little by little, the space he occupied had been taken over by other things. Books, ideas, old desires rediscovered. It wasn't a specific day. It was the accumulation of days in which she chose to move on, even without knowing the destination. And, ironically, the less I searched for meaning, the more sense things made. She started walking at different times, smiling more naturally. It was as if something in her had understood that waiting for the person who discarded her was like letting a plant die with the excuse that the rain would come. At work, she began to be noticed. One manager praised her posture in meetings. Another asked her to lead a new project. She wasn't trying to impress, she just did it with truth. And truth has its own shine. One day, after an important presentation, she was invited to a private event about women entrepreneurs. She said yes, almost without thinking, and that night she wore the same blue dress that had been packed in her suitcase from the lost weekend. But now, it didn't have any memories of pain. It smelled of overcoming. She arrived at the event without rushing, with her hair tied up in a simple and elegant way. She wasn't looking for attention, but the attention came. Not because of her appearance, but because of her presence. She exuded a silent strength that drew attention. A man approached her respectfully, complimented her speech, and asked about her projects. She answered calmly, without shrinking, without trying to appear inferior. She was listened to with interest, not with desire. And for the first time in a long time, she felt confident in being who she was, without the need to please. In the days that followed, she was called to other appointments, some social, others professional. She began to meet people who talked about the future without making big promises, people who looked her in the eye, who listened more than they spoke, and this healed her in a way she didn't realize. One of these meetings was repeated, a coffee, then another, and another. The man didn't ask about her past, didn't force anything. He just showed up. And that, for someone who had waited so long for someone who never came, was a revolutionary gesture. At home, she danced alone to the sound of songs that used to make her cry, no longer out of longing, but out of gratitude, for having survived, for having gone through the darkness and not having lost herself. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman who didn't need to prove anything, who no longer asked for love. She just gave it with measure and awareness, and that was rare, because she now knew that feeling is not weakness, it is courage, and that love, when well planted, flourishes, but when denied, it turns into a root of strength, of choice, of rebirth. It was late in the afternoon, when the sky was already beginning to turn golden, that their paths crossed. She was at a charity event organized by a friend, something discreet, elegant, with soft music and people who spoke with their eyes, not their pockets. She was wearing a light white outfit, her hair loose and simple earrings. Her gaze was calm, as if she didn't expect anything more from anyone, and that made her luminous. She didn't stand out because of effort. She was like a candle lit in a dark room. Whoever noticed it didn't forget it. He arrived with measured steps, surrounded by familiar names. He still wore the same expensive watch, the same impeccably ironed shirt, the same posture of someone in control. But something in his shoulders seemed more hunched, heavier. He walked among the guests as if seeking recognition, but found only formalities. When he saw her, he stopped. Just for a second, but enough for time to lose its meaning. She was laughing with two women, holding a glass of sparkling wine when she felt his gaze. She turned slowly, without fear, and saw him. The same face, the same presence, but now as distant as a memory that no longer hurts. She stared at him without rushing, for a whole second. Then she smiled, not out of longing nor out of pride. She smiled kindly and went back to what she was doing. He tried to maintain his composure, but her gesture disarmed him completely. It wasn't contempt. It was something much worse for a man like him. It was indifference, because the opposite of love isn't hate. It's the silence that comes when the feeling no longer lives there. And she was empty of it. Later, he watched her from afar, talking to people who ignored him. People who talked. About ideas, art, purpose. She flowed there as if she had always belonged to that world, not the world of status, but the world of true connections. At one point, one of the speakers approached, touched her on the shoulder, and invited her to the stage. She hesitated but accepted. She walked up with light steps, spoke calmly. She told him about her journey, about the importance of starting over, even when everything seemed small. She didn't mention names. But he knew. Each word was a flower she planted on the rubble he left behind. When she came down, the applause was sincere. He tried to get closer, but something held him back. Maybe it was shame. Maybe it was the belated recognition that he had lost her, not to another man, but to the woman she had become. And that was even harder to accept. She left early without fanfare. She passed him by with a friend. He opened his mouth, but said nothing. She just looked at him, held his gaze for 2 seconds, and then moved on. The wind blew through her hair, and he realized that her scent was still the same, the one that reminded him of spring. But now that scent wasn't his anymore. It never was. He was just lucky enough to be around for a little while. And he wasted it. 2 days after the event, he typed the message. He deleted it, he rewrote it, he deleted it again. He rehearsed phrases in the mirror as if words could mend what had been torn apart with disdain. You looked beautiful. I missed you. We need to talk. None of them seemed enough. None of them felt honest. Deep down, he knew there were no words that could erase what he had done, but he had to try. He had to feel, even if only for a few seconds, that it was still possible to return to that place where he felt seen without a mask. When she finally sent the message, she was already in a cafe writing in her notebook. She read his name on the screen, as if reading an old news story. She took a deep breath. She didn't feel angry or happy, just a distant echo of something that had once been intense. She opened the conversation and read it slowly. The message said, "I'm sorry for everything. Can we have a coffee?" She looked at the cup in her hands. It was full and warm, like her life, like her present. It took him a few hours to respond, not to play games, but because he needed to think. And when he did, it was simple. "I don't see the need. I wish you peace." He saw those 7 words and felt the ground slip away. Because I had expected anything but that. I had expected tears, maybe, a painful text, a relief at having him back, but not that serenity. Her response wasn't cruel. It was final. And what scared him most was the realization that now she really didn't need him anymore. In the days that followed, he tried other ways. An anonymous bouquet at her door, a book she had once quoted, discreetly left at the reception desk at work, an unsigned note with the phrase, "I feel your absence in me." She received it, looked at it, and returned it all to the world with the same peace of someone who has learned to lose and has chosen to move on. She no longer needed to prove anything. She didn't need to forgive someone who had never truly asked for forgiveness. She knew his regret wasn't love. It was a wounded ego. On a silent night, he tried one more time. He waited outside her building, leaning against his imported car, holding a flower. When she arrived alone, she stopped a few feet away from him. Her gaze was calm, his lost. He started to speak, but she raised her hand and said simply, "It doesn't make sense anymore." There was no anger in her voice, only certainty. She walked into the building without looking back, and he stood there, holding a flower that would never be delivered. That night he understood. It wasn't about winning him back. It was about facing the consequences. And the biggest of all was knowing that her time was no longer within his reach, that love, the truest he had ever had, didn't wait for him, and it wouldn't come back. Because what she had now wasn't revenge, it was freedom. The phone rang early in the morning. An important meeting had been cancelled without warning. It was the third cancellation in 2 weeks. A former business partner had requested an audit of the contracts, and a newspaper had suggested ethical problems at one of the companies associated with his name. He tried to control everything as he always had, with phone calls, promises, money. But something had changed. The respect that had once preceded him was now replaced by distrust, and where there had been admiration, there was now silence. The same silence he had so often offered her. The woman who had been with him since the summer disappeared without warning. She took his suitcases, his cards, and even a luxury watch that he swore he had kept. She left only an impersonal note. "You have everything, but you never knew how to give anything." He looked at the piece of paper and felt that it was less about her and more about everything, about who he was, about what he chose to be. He sat in the dark living room of the penthouse and, for the first time, looked at his reflection in the glass. His face was still beautiful, but empty and old inside. His social life was falling apart. Invitations were dwindling, friends avoided contact, and he realized how much his relationships were made of mirrors. They all reflected only what he displayed. Nothing was deep, nothing was true. He tried to reorganize his schedule, rebuild his business, launch a new project. But without support, everything seemed fragile. A house of cards shaking at the slightest breath of reality. The empire built on image was now crumbling in the face of the absence of genuine affection. One afternoon, he went into a discreet restaurant he had frequented when she was still with him. He sat at the same table and ordered the same wine. He waited for the past to come back somehow. But everything was different. The waiter didn't recognize him. The food seemed tasteless. And the emptiness next to him wasn't from the chair. It was from his soul. He picked up his cell phone, opened the gallery, and saw an old photo of the two of them. She was smiling with the wind on her face. He seemed absent even in the image. He had never been whole. Only now did he realize it. He returned home and found the plant she had given him as a gift in the first few months. Miraculously, it had survived in a corner of the living room. But the leaves were dry, hanging to the side as if asking for help. He touched it with guilt. It was alive but forgotten, and he understood the parallel, because she, the woman, had also been alive and had been forgotten by him until she dried up inside. She called a therapist. It was the first time she had asked for help in years. She said little. She said only, "I don't know who I am anymore." She cried silently, not for her, but for herself, because she now understood what she had lost and what she would never have again. Because when you break a real heart, the sound may not echo at the time, but the silence of it destroys you later. She wasn't looking for recognition, but it came. It was subtle at first, a public thank you at a conference, an article praising her contribution to a social project, an invitation to speak about her career at a university. She accepted it humbly, always with that contained sparkle in her eyes of someone who knows the value of what she has suffered, because what was now evident in her was not arrogance, it was presence. She inhabited her own body with confidence, she walked with firmness, and wherever she went, she left a trail of lucidity. Her name began to circulate in places that previously seemed unreachable. People who had previously ignored her now listened to her attentively. But she was not dazzled, because anyone who has been forgotten on the stairs of a building will never accept crumbs as a party. Again, she knew exactly where she was stepping, and even more, she knew who she was with or without applause. At an international event on innovation and social impact, she was called to the main stage. Her talk was about starting over, about the power of silence, about how sometimes the greatest act of self-love is not explaining yourself. She spoke delicately, without dramatizing, but there was truth in every syllable. The audience fell silent. Some cried, others recognized themselves. When she finished, she received a standing ovation, and she herself inside also applauded herself, not for the external recognition, but for having survived doubt, rejection, abandonment, and for having chosen to move forward with ease. Backstage, a magazine editor approached her, complimented her speech, and proposed an interview. A businessman asked her to consult on a new humanitarian project. An older man took her hand and said, "You reminded me of my wife. She was also left behind. And she also chose not to let herself be lost." She smiled, because she knew when a woman rebuilds herself in silence, she moves the world without raising her voice. At home, she lay down on the couch and hugged her own body. There was no more pain, no more resentment. There was memory and gratitude for having felt so much, for having loved so much, for having believed, and most importantly, for having chosen not to harden. She knew that true love was not the kind that holds you back, that promises, and then becomes absence. True love was the kind that is born within, blossoms with dignity, and continues even without an audience. That night, she dreamed of the sea, but it wasn't the sea he had promised. It was a sea of her own, calm, blue, immense. And she was in it, standing, with her small suitcase in her hands, looking at the horizon, without pain, without haste, ready for everything that was yet to come. It was an ordinary morning when he saw her again. Not at an event, not on the internet, not surrounded by applause. She was sitting alone on a bench facing the sea. She was wearing light clothing, sunglasses, and simple sandals. Beside her, a book and a bottle of water. She seemed calm, completely oblivious to the hustle and bustle of the city. He was walking aimlessly, avoiding yet another call from his lawyer, yet another email demanding answers he could no longer give. Seeing her there, something inside him snapped, as if time had stopped to force him to look. Not at her, but at everything he had lost. She hesitated to approach, but she did, slowly, like someone who fears not being recognized. And maybe it was better that way. But she saw him. She looked up calmly. No trace of surprise, no hostility, just presence. He stopped a few steps away, took off his glasses, wanted to say something, but didn't know where to start. Then she was the one who spoke. Her voice was firm, but soft. Hi. That was all. A hi that carried everything. The past. What was said, what never was. He sat down next to her, respecting her space. And silence settled between them, this time not as a wall, but as a bridge of farewell. "You look fine," he said. The sentence came out quieter than he intended. She looked out to sea and said, "I am." There was no vanity, no provocation, just truth. And that broke him more than any confrontation. He wanted to say that he missed her, that he regretted it, that he felt small in front of her now. But it all seemed insufficient, because there was a dignity there that didn't ask for explanations. She was whole. And he, empty. "I was a coward," he murmured, staring at his hands. She didn't answer right away. She just let the wind blow through her hair for a few seconds. Then, with a calm smile, she said, "You were who you knew you were, and I was who I had to be to survive." He felt the weight of that sentence. It wasn't an accusation. It was an acknowledgement. She didn't expect anything more. She didn't want revenge. She just wanted to be at peace, and in a way he understood that that was the most forgiveness he would ever get. After a few minutes, she looked at her watch, stood up slowly, picked up the book and the bottle. The small suitcase, yes, was there too. It always was. A symbol of what she carries, lightness, truth, and a love that now belonged only to her. He tried to say goodbye, but his voice failed. She didn't cry, nor did she smile too much. She just looked into his eyes, held his gaze for 3 seconds and said, "Take care of yourself." And she left. He stood there, alone, looking at the sea he once promised her and never delivered. He thought about everything he had built, and how much it all weighed now that there was no one who truly loved him. He remembered the big suitcase, the boat, the other woman who had become nothing, and he realized everything he had taken was material. But what she had taken, even without his permission, was the most valuable part of him. And that he would never get back. Life went on. It continued to grow, helping people, creating new paths. It didn't post anything about the past. It didn't need to. Its silence said more than 1,000 words. As for him, it continued to exist on the margins of what was, trying to rebuild something with the pieces of what he had thrown away out of arrogance, because karma sometimes doesn't shout, it just waits, and when it arrives, it doesn't make noise, it just reveals itself. And now he saw, with brutal clarity, that the love he left on the stairs of a building was in fact the only thing worth taking to the sea. If this story touched your heart in any way, leave your like now. This shows us that it is worth continuing to bring narratives that speak directly to the soul. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss any of the upcoming stories that reveal what silence often hides. And now I want to hear from you. Comment below with the sentence, "Love that leaves in silence returns as strength." It shows that you stuck it out until the end. And it strengthens this community of people who still believe in the value of truth. And before you leave, the video that is appearing on your screen right now brings another real, intense and transformative story. Click to watch because it will also affect you and deeply.